Welcome to Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. I'm your host, GV Pawan Kumar. It is my absolute delight and pleasure to introduce my colleague, Devapriya Chattopadhyay. Devapriya is a professor at the Earth and Climate Science Department at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Pune. She is a paleobiologist and marine biologist and also looks into very interesting aspects of fossils and the specific model what she has been studying is the shelled molluscs, which has very fascinating kind of science behind it. Specifically, she and her research group also looks at microorganisms, and the questions she's interested in is how physical and biological environment can influence those kind of systems. Her laboratory and Devapriya herself actually explore systems underwater, including in aquariums, which is very fascinating. So, with very brief introduction, I welcome Devapriya on Pratidwani.
Thank you, Pavan. I'm a big fan of this show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Devapriya, we are going to get started in terms of understanding your origins. How did you get interested in science? Where were you born? Can you please give us a small kind of an overview of that, please?
Yes. So I was born technically in Calcutta, but I did not grow up there. So I think I was moved to this small, tiny town in the north of Bengal when I was 21 days old. That's what I hear from my mother.
Nice.
Um, and that's where I grew up. It's a very small town called Balurghat. Uh, and that's where I spent the first 18 years of my life. I finished my school from there. And if you think of anything which is closest to my roots, that would be the place which
Place.
I consider as my roots.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, give us a kind of a picture of your early childhood in terms of how was it at home, what kind of exposure you had through your parents, etc.
Um, I think when I think about city kids, I think I had a very unusual childhood. So again, it's a small, tiny town. It had a lot of nature around, nice forest, a very pretty river called Athray, um, and because it was a small town, everybody knew each other. My parents were both academics. My mom was teaching in a school, one of the government schools, and my dad was a professor in the college. Both of them were from humanities. So I think that kind of instilled some love about literature, poetry from early on. But the other aspect of this is I also grew up in a household where both parents are working. So, in the context of this tiny town around 80s or 90s, that was quite unusual. So, we, I would grow up, or I would do my stuff while one of the parent would be parenting me, and most of the times it's my dad, because my mom had a very fixed school timing. So she would leave in the morning and come back around 4 5 ish. But my dad, because he was teaching in a college, he would go there during the class, but he would come back and spend the time with me. And often I heard it later that my mom would get complaints from the neighbors that my dad is not doing a good parenting job because I will be playing with sand and all kinds of dirty things, where my dad would be simply sitting there reading a book. But I think those are one of the most cherishable memories that I
So
had.
typical of a dad. I can relate to that. And
Yes.
people complaining, that is very so
Yes,
interesting.
and
Yeah.
I think there was a point of to the extent point of guilt for my mother that she's not spending enough time. And I think when I grew up, I tried to convince her that those were really good
Good
memories,
memories.
so you didn't do anything wrong. The other aspect of the thing that I have vivid memory was my dad was an amateur painter, and all the weekends, I mean, At that point of time, there was no weekend, it
Weekend,
was
yeah.
only
Sunday,
Sundays.
yeah.
But on Sundays, he would go to this forest and do landscape, and I would accompany him. And while he is painting, I would roam around this forest and explore things. Could be a little anthill here and a red seed somewhere there. But those were times where I think I really loved this experience, that there was no pressure, and I'm simply going around and trying to get meaning out of it. I loved it, loved this joy and excitement of finding something new, and then taking a step back and thinking, how did it come here? If you ask me what is science, I think that's basically
Yes,
what I
correct.
conceive it as science. And this I was doing when I think probably I was 4 or 5. And I think that's something that never left me. So although my parents never tried to give me a very pedantic definition of what science is, this was one of the experience, when I look back, is actually what was closest to thinking about experiments in natural world and how I kind of linked myself to it. So those were really great memories, and I think that never left me. I always feel good in nature and trying to explore things and try to make sense of it.
Very fascinating. A couple of kind of specific aspects I would want to explore within this kind of part of what you mentioned. One is that exposure to natural environment, which probably has a very big kind of implication on your future work. And second is that this aspect of growing up with parents who have very deep interest in literature and humanities is is something very interesting for a scientist to actually evolve out, because there's a lot of debate. If you probably would be aware of this, CP Snow's very famous essay of Two Cultures, where general aspect is that the culture of humanities and the culture of sciences have been not talking to each other for a long time. And I've actually increasingly seen, especially among children who grow up in Bengal, at least in the time scales what we're talking about, uh, is that rich culture of the literature is anyway embedded in the family, even if the parents are not actually, let's say, professors, unlike your case. uh, so this aspect of strong kind of intellectual environment, is it generally the thing which is prevalent across Bengal or in your environment when you're growing up, or was it special to your own family?
I would say that it was typical
Mm,
to Bengal
mm,
if you isolate the economic strata.
mm,
So the people who were speaking a language in which the books are written, and if they can afford to buy those books, then yes, it was a very typical scenario for household. But I was fortunate to go to a government school where students from all strata attended the school, and I could see that there were friends for whom their parents are working in other places, or some of them were uh, daily workers
mm.
for an amount they would work in any field. And for them, often it's difficult to even speak in the same language. And I would like to note here that we are still talking about the same language, Bengali. But one of their major struggle was that they cannot write in the same language in the exam papers. So I think I had a natural advantage because I didn't have to do this translation.
Translation.
So yes, it's true that if you take this socio-economic strata, people were reading books and they were appreciating it. And I think it also came with this general consciousness about society and about education, that you should read books,
Mm,
and
mm.
there was no
No
internet and
internet,
there was
yes.
no other entertainment. So you should read books. And but I think it was also quite narrow in its scope when we look at the overall
Overall
spectrum
spectrum.
of the
Fascinating,
society.
fascinating, because you very nicely kind of brought out a very particular and a pertinent point of people, even though they're speaking the same language, the hierarchy is also there within that language. And this is sometimes not appreciated, because even growing up down south, uh, various different places has a kind of a vernacular kind of version of the same language, which is not the literary version. And the books are mainly written in the literary version, and it somehow gets decoupled. The other aspect is that the first question what I was alluding to, that in that environment you're also exposed to this natural aspect. You also mentioned you were close to a river, which is very kind of privileged in that sense, naturally privileged. I'm
Yes.
not saying this to be economically privileged, because there are so many people who may actually be living in great houses but would not have such kind of an accessibility. Could you just paint us a picture of what it was to grow up in such kind of an environment?
I think it was again, it was wonderful.
Hmm.
I cannot think of anything that I missed by growing up there. That was, for me, that was the ideal childhood. And I had a reference. The reference point was every summer we would go to Calcutta because our cousins were living there. And all the family members, except for my mom and dad, they were living in Calcutta. So I would be visiting there, cooped up in one flat for the entire summer
Summer.
and longing when I can go back. Yes, they would discuss about their daily activities. Some of them were quite fascinating. For example, they were going to an English medium school,
Cool. Yeah.
and they had big buildings, and they would tell me stuff which I would feel slightly intimidated about, that we didn't have those things. Like they had a school bus, and I would think that I walk to the school. They had some of the typical things, like they would have very specific holidays and calendars being provided at the beginning of
Great.
the school. We didn't have that. The school teacher would tell, okay, tomorrow is a holiday, and there would be a holiday. So those, I would say, very structured stuff
Uh,
of city life was a bit intimidating, but I had a funny experience. I think we were exchanging notes, and I was always constantly feeling that, okay, my school is probably not that great and all these. Um, but once they mentioned something like, yes, we don't have regular sports because our school does not have a playground. And that was my
Very
winning
big
point. I
point.
said, how can you have a school without a playground? Because we had a really large playground, and it was an integral component of school life. So I think every time I went from Balurghat to Kolkata, it was a constant reminder that there are societies which are very different. And I'm part of one, and I loved it. And it sort of settled me in there. Part of it is also coming from my parents. So my mom grew up in Calcutta. So for her, I think part of her mind was not quite well adjusted to
Negative.
this very tiny place. But she had a very good, community around
Community.
her. On the other hand, my dad, he was born in what we call Bangladesh
Hmm.
before partition. So partition left a trauma, and he moved to Calcutta during school days. And he once told me that, just like your friends, I was comfortable speaking in my own dialect, which nobody considers when I'm writing.
Right.
So I literally had to learn how to write and how to communicate. It's almost like learning a
Learning a
new
new language.
language.
Yeah.
And when he eventually got this job far away from Calcutta, he was very happy because he almost found a similarity to his roots, where he grew up in a rural part of undivided
And
Bengal.
Bengal.
So I think all these senses started to give me different perspectives, and I was very happy in this small little town where the only mode of transport was this cycle rickshaw
Rickshaw.
or cycle. So yes, that's the place where I grew up. It had two colleges, a couple of schools, only one private school where only a very few people could afford to go.
Mhm.
So everybody used to go to these government schools, government
Mm.
sponsored schools. The river was flowing right next to our schools. And between 1985 to 95, there were almost every other year there would be a flooding,
Flooding. Yes. Yeah.
and during these floodings, our schools would be closed because they would be used as refuge
Really?
areas. So here we go again for a complete break of routine. And eventually the teachers could catch up, and we would catch up,
Yes,
and
sir.
we would move to the next class. So this is also a sense that, what takes priority, because some of my classmates would tell me stories that they actually stayed in that classroom, they took the refuge,
Refuge. Wow.
and they would tell me those stories, and they would say, okay, we slept in this particular
Mm.
bench.
Mm.
And again, another slight reminder that we are really fortunate that we never had to go
Go there.
and stay there. And I think it also never let me question that it's so unusual to close the school for 2 months,
Mm.
because I would get some of these questions
Yes.
from my cousins.
Cousins. Okay.
But it felt so natural that people do not have home, so this is the
It's a
best
natural
solution.
region. Yeah. That's also a remarkable aspect of a school in a place. You can see just now the elections got over, and all the most of the schools were the place where the election booths were actually arranged. It becomes such a central part of any society, right? Because a school actually is not only about education. It becomes a central point to how a particular place is growing. And many places across the world, the places are identified by the locations of their schools and educational institutions. Even here in Pune, for example, for listeners who don't know, NCL is actually one of the biggest landmarks in
Yes.
Pune.
Yeah.
Not even ICER. ICER, of course, has evolved in recent times, but NCL is actually an age-old landmark where people across Pune actually would be identifying. So coming to the point of this wonderful, and also unique experience what you've had, uh, it also means that you probably are kind of trying to look at this from a scientific viewpoint. Was that anywhere in your mind while growing up? Because you had a river just beside your school, which is probably the one of the best educations you can have, not only because of the variety of natural stuff you actually can sample, but also it has a very positive effect on education, on people's life, I heard, because the proximity to water actually gives you a slightly more broader perspective of biodiversity, unlike people, let's say, in cities where you are not exposed to natural water bodies. You probably do not have this. Given that you actually have done research quite deep in, literally deep into the water, I'm just curious to know whether there was some kind of a connection there, or was it something you are not thinking about then?
I think it was definitely there in the subconscious mind, but during our school time, nobody actually told me that you can do
Okay.
something which is the stream that you follow
Okay.
to do things that are scattered in your brain, which is vaguely called natural
Cognizant.
science. So, I mean, both the forest as well as the river, both of them provided ample amount of biodiversity,
Hmm.
starting from trees to small mammals to birds, lots of
Lots of
insects,
insects.
and those memories never fade. Some of the things that I learned about ecology,
Hmm.
the behavior, those I learned by observing, though none of them were written in the books, and they became part of your almost like muscle
Muscle
memory.
memory.
And I think that's a very important aspect, because I could very easily connect to these things. It kind of comes very easily to me when predicting what is going to happen if one organism reacts like this. Maybe not all of them are correct, but it sort of had that very solid background
Background.
of observation, taking information from there, and kind of predicting what's going to happen next. So yes, it was not properly formulated, I can pretty well say that.
Yeah, yeah.
In the school, it was a regular school, so we had emphasis on science as well as literature. And because it was a West Bengal board, we also had a lot of emphasis on geography and history. Uh, so all of these things were going around. And as I said, that I had natural advantage of communicating in my language.
Language.
So I was doing pretty well in the school. And I really did not think a lot about profession at that point of time. I think my goal of what I want to become was constantly shifting, from some crazy ideas to even more crazy
Crazy ideas.
ideas. But this part that my life would be a life of an explorer full of adventure, I think that was there
That
from the
was
very
a
beginning.
fascinating, fascinating. One more point before we move further into the kind of stuff you kind of looked into in terms of even primary and secondary education, is that your exposure to geography. This is a topic which we're going to actually explore a little bit more, because that's one of the most fascinating topics which has not been taught probably well. But if done properly with like a new way of looking at things, it is turning out to be not only fascinating but also extremely important, which I'm going to actually ask you more to elaborate on. Uh, so, how is it to learn geography and history, which is a very important component of kind of work what you also do, which kind of lay a very important foundation, and including some very interesting work you and your colleagues have done in recent times. I'll come to that part of it, where you also connect it to colonial history, etc. This understanding of geography and history at a very young age, at least getting some exposure is very crucial, because that is one of the lacking parts of a child's education. Because right at the beginning, they get over kind of channeled towards STEM parts of it. Uh, Nothing wrong, but it should also be equally complemented with humanities. Was that something you felt good about it? Because I also grew up in an environment very similar to this, where it's not an ultra competitive environment, which means it's more relaxed, which also means that you get to sample some things which need not be only that is which is very important in terms of your vocation or something like that.
Um, well, both geography as well as history, I was glad that we had this exposure, but I also have to say that it also depended on the teacher who was teaching us. Very easily, it would go into this direction where you are just being given a set of information, and that's about it. But only the good teachers, especially in geography, we had a very good teacher in our sixth grade who came and announced that from now on we are not going to look at the books. We are only going to look at the maps. That was the approach. You don't learn information. You try to learn how
How
one acquires those information and why should one do
do
it.
it?
So largely, I think geography, at least with, I mean, the books were primarily written to give you only information.
Information.
Only these rare teachers who came and tried to show something else, that why do we care and how one comes to this conclusion. So there were aspects of geography which is very, very human based approaches, like industrial revolution and things like that, where a particular industry is growing and why is that. So those aspects were more into human geography,
Geography, yeah.
and only a small part of it would be related to landforms, But again, the emphasis is going to be more on names
Names.
and where you find
Mm.
it, not why it's
Why?
there.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so
Exactly.
that's about geography. The history, I mean, again, it's something that I think my dad influenced a lot,
Mm, mm,
because he would insist that you read books.
mm.
It doesn't have to be a textbook, you read any book. And we had these big volume by R.C. Majumdar and Basham, and I don't think I understood
Yes.
any of these things, but my dad would
It
insist
is
that
okay.
it's almost like your responsibility
Mm.
as a future uh, citizen of a
Citizen
society
society.
that you should know your history. And obviously, some of the
Mhm.
results ended with a bad grade in the exam because I could barely cover parts. But I think that also started with this appreciation that these things are showing the connections. It's
Connections.
not just information. And once you see the connections, putting informations are much easier. Definitely didn't bring a lot of marks in the exam, but developed an appreciation for
Appreciation.
history.
This thing what you mentioned about the connection is the central point of a lot of things what we have to really do with education, because many a times as a fellow teacher you would probably agree that it is the context which makes learning more meaningful, because many a times if you learn something, if you don't understand why you are learning it and what is it kind of in a broader context in which this particular question is asked, what are the issues related to the topic what you are now looking at. In fact, growing up personally also, some lot of education we have had lacks that context. And in fact it makes learning not very enjoyable, right? Because if your aim is only to get through an examination, you would probably be forcefully doing something just to take care of that part of examination. But many a times what has stuck with us throughout our careers or for whatever work what one does is those questions which were kind of addressed or raised. Sometimes an open-ended question is more fascinating than anything else. For example, a lot of questions in geography and history are subject to interpretation. Maybe less in geography because there are some kind of evidences which you can bring in. History is more kind of complicated because it's a complex problem. Kind of you're painting the picture from the past, and you will have only few dots, and therefore it will be more kind of challenging. With this kind of background, like excellent exposure, also very unique, geographical location itself, has all kind of culminated into you getting interested in science probably at that particular point of time. So growing up and going into your, let's say, higher education, I would not really jump into your college education, but let's say at high school, were you already making some plans of what is the kind of subjects you are interested in?
Um, so when I was in my senior year, so I'll start from
Mm.
maybe 8th to
Yeah,
12th.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the
That's the
part.
yeah.
Uh, there are a couple of things. One is, I think my mom, because she was in the school system,
Mm.
and she had seen the progression of students who did well in the classes
Classroom.
for years,
Mm.
what they would choose and
Sure.
what they would select as their profession. And because it's a tiny town, there were only limited options.
Options. Okay.
Some of them will not take a better option just because they have to leave town. That was
Okay.
also there.
Mm.
So I think for a lot of people, it was a limited exposure of what they can do, would push them to continue either with physics
Mm.
or with engineering or studying medicine. So these were pretty much the three
Three.
uh, directions where most of our toppers in the school would
Would
choose.
choose. Okay.
And then there were all these tutors in the town.
Mm.
Many of them would do it voluntarily. So they would basically say, okay, you are a good student, I'll teach you free of cost. Just come and, join.
Join. Yeah.
Uh, and this system was going around for quite some time. Even
But what is the incentive for
I,
them?
I don't know. Some of them actually love to teach,
Mm, mm.
but for some of them, it also mattered that okay, one of my student performed
Perform
this
well.
well.
Okay, nice, nice.
Uh, but this ecosystem was there. It's a parallel ecosystem
Yeah.
to the school, and they would push for you write the joint entrance
Mm.
examination. For IITs, the craze didn't start yet at that tiny town, because it means moving to Calcutta just to take the exam.
Exam. Got-
Even for the state level joint entrance test, one has to go to another town to just
To
write
just.
the exam.
Mm.
So there were a lot of barriers, and thankfully my parents were not very pushy when it came to deciding a particular stream. They simply said that wherever you feel comfortable, you go
Yeah,
ahead with
baby.
this, but with a disclaimer
Mm.
that being academics in humanities, we
Mm.
are going to give you this caution that the opportunities are much lower,
Lower.
and you have to continue for a very long time. You have to be ultra good
Mm. Mm.
in order to be
Make
successful.
it. Mm.
So now it's up to you. I think that was
That was
quite
all.
a bit of thing,
Mm.
and I naturally found things. I could connect things in the science, what was being
Mm.
taught to us. Um, so it was a natural choice when I moved to 12th or 11th and 12th, where
Mm.
we had to choose the stream, that I would choose physics, chemistry, math, and biology.
Biology. Okay.
So that was a standard stream.
Mm.
And our school did not even offer any other science in the
In
school. So
school.
that was the only
Only thing.
choice we had. And I did not have any problems with
Mm.
that. I thought it's fine. The other, I'm kind
Mm.
of sidestepping and
Yeah, yeah.
going back, other thing that happened which kind of changed my thinking was, I think when I was in ninth grade, there was a seminar organized, and this was a competitive seminar where we have to choose a topic and talk about it. But it was something not like an extempo where you just go and
Mm.
stand in
Mm.
the stage and think of things and talk, which I used to do a lot.
Yeah.
It was something that you prepare and then speak. So we were given a month to prepare for it. And I always wanted to do something which is new.
Mm.
That always fascinated me from very early on.
Okay.
One of the topic was the development of coal and petroleum.
Mm.
And I thought, this is fascinating. I have no idea how it forms. Let me try. And I went to my parents and I think school teacher, the geography teacher said, if you, this is a textbook where
Mm.
some
Mm.
things are written, but textbook writes only for a page and I'm supposed to talk about it for 15 minutes.
Mm.
So then the next stop was parents just for some guidance. And my dad said, there is a library, go and search.
Church. Yeah.
So I went to the library and tried to gather all kinds of information. I came across a book and then I got that book. So that was the first
Mm.
experience of what we call now independent
Independent
research.
research. Nice.
And I was fascinated by it. I developed it. I put all these plots
Mm.
and charts and all these things. And I did fairly well. I got selected from that town. And then the next one is in Calcutta, in one of the seminar halls where schools from all
Mm.
districts
Mm.
came, and that whole experience was fascinating.
Yes. Yeah.
And because of that, I actually came across a number of books which were written by geologists. That was the first time I understood there is this entire
The
stream
stream.
where people question how things look like this and not the other way around, rather than just the information. So I said, okay, great. This can be a place. But by that time, I had no idea whether, some colleges teach it. It's just I knew that there were a few people who wrote those books. Some of them were Indian, and they write geologists next to their names.
Uh-huh. Mm.
Um, this is one aspect that happened. The other aspect was two of my cousins around this time, they were pursuing higher studies. Both of them were doing PhD, one in India, one abroad. And whenever they would come and I would meet, I would talk to them about their experience, their life. And this,
Exactly.
excitement
Yeah.
was really contagious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this life of pursuing a problem, but also enjoying life, having complete independence. That was fascinating.
Fascinating.
And I mean, that was like my very deep interest, almost selfish interest, that
Yeah.
somehow I have to get to that life.
Like
um, it just seemed way too
very
cool not to pursue.
wonderful, wonderful. This is something I we are recording it as audio, but if somebody is actually looking at Devapriya, she's so excited to describe this whole thing. That is probably one of the fascinating aspect of becoming a scientist. Of course, there are various different reasons, but this is one of the main reason why one becomes a scientist, because that kind of intellectual excitement one gets is kind of paralleled in any way. Yeah, yeah.
I also had a
Yeah.
very naive
Mm,
idea.
mm,
So there is a series of science fiction stories
mm.
written by Satyajit
So
Ray
yeah, yeah, yeah,
in Bengali,
yeah.
and one of the character was Professor Shonku.
Mm,
He was this eccentric scientist, and the stories would revolve around his experience, his adventure. So some of these adventures are more fictional
yeah,
than
yeah, yeah,
science,
yeah.
but just this life that you are pursuing something just for
It's
fun
fun.
because it
Right.
fascinates you. You go to places, you make friends with people across the globe.
Uh,
That felt really liberating. Yes, it's a very naive idea
yeah.
to chase something that you read in a fiction.
No, you know what, Devapriya, this is a very important point. What you mentioned, you may call it naive, and sometimes you might actually also kind of sometimes people who are very specific and career oriented may even call it as very idealistic way of looking at it. But what is life without that, in the sense, right? Because if you are really only talking about practicalities, the practicalities also are actually derived from some idealistic thought that sometimes doesn't get okay. Everything, if it becomes only bottom line, if you want to just make a lot of money, if that is the only reason why you have to do it, then you will always, if you have only that as a question in your mind, then you will stop doing a lot of things in your life, right? Because and then no doubt money is important. I'm no way encouraging people not to really worry about their economic situation. It's a very important thing, but it can also be a kind of a consequence of the work what one does. That is exactly what academics like us do. And this is something, there is almost an element of an element of an apology when one tells that you are thinking little on an ideal way, which one should not, in my opinion. What do you think? Do you think so? Because see, a lot of times kids are told, oh, there are two extremes. One is only chase what you are interested in, etc., etc. Other thing is you should actually really work something which will make you rich and etc. But there is something in between which is equally important, right?
Yes, I feel I was very fortunate in many ways, because again, uh, I think I am kind of going back to the
Mm,
previous generation. That, as I mentioned, that my father kind of moved from, sort of faced the partition
mm,
in
mm,
in literal sense,
mm,
and it was not very easy life for a family of refugees in Calcutta. So there were days where my aunts would literally look for food
mm,
because they were the elders, and my dad was the youngest of this entire family, and they would not find it. So there were phases when he and many of his brothers went through phases of malnutrition
mm,
to complete
mm,
starvation.
mm,
But this had left a memory which they were very eager to pass on to the next generation, that look, money is power.
mm.
You have to have it so that you can lead a comfortable
Yeah.
life. comfortable
Mm.
life. But the definition of comfort is up to
No.
you.
Very nice. Excellent.
So you can get by with a very little money if you are satisfied. He would also tell me these things that, when I was pursuing humanities and eventually doing a PhD in Bengali literature, I was also teaching in a
Mm.
school. So this is
Mm.
my dad. And his point was, yes, probably it was a luxury, but I managed to do it. Yes, I had a very supportive family. Some of them sacrificed, some of them took jobs at their very early
Mm.
age. But all of us should remember that comfort is something that is negotiable. That's something you have control. And the getting the money
Mm.
is never enough if you are not satisfied. So I think that sort of thought at the beginning is at least freed me from a lot of pressure that I have to earn a lot of money.
This is
But
wonderful.
but
Wonderful.
I also had this constant push that I have to earn enough money so that I can be completely
Independent.
independent. So these two sort of balancing
Balance.
acts um, guided a lot of my academic as well as uh, you know finally occupational
Okay. Tragedy.
trajectory.
Yeah. In fact, this is something what you're mentioning is extremely important, uh, because you also have not only been in positions as an academic, but also you took up some part of leadership also, which we're going to come a little later, which is very important. Not only just as a woman, but also as any individual. This is so crucial. The aspect what you mentioned about the comfort, the definition of comfort is up to you, is actually one of the learnings of the lives, right? Because there is no limit. uh, there's a joke that there is no cap for capitalism. Right? You would always be able to actually earn a lot of money. It's okay in a different situation, where let's say you have to fight the socialistic viewpoints. This is actually one of the very important counter kind of point which brings in. There is no way one actually can make a strong case of a society where a lot of facilities can be given without making a case for making people making money, right? Because otherwise it would be just a pipe dream in that sense. And what you mentioned is very, very correct, but also the definition of comfort, of really deciding what it is to feel that you are actually in a good space of both mind and in terms of your materialistic living is crucial. So, which brings us further to the aspect of you now kind of evolving into a slightly more serious researcher. Now that you have this exposure, you're going to Kolkata to also, to some kind of conference, kind of conference, with already an interesting exposure to research, which is very different. Not many kids do get that exposure. You know, accessing a library to address a question is not something which is common even among kids today. That is an unfortunate thing. We are again privileged, the fact that we live in an environment where we are in an institute and there is an access to the library, etc. How crucial was that thing? Like, really, you are seeing already something which is probably also thanks to your parents, who have some kind of an academic background and are academics. Was that an important thing?
I mean, one point I think
Mm.
I feel
Mm.
that today it's true that kids do not access library,
Mm.
but that was not an option for us. In
Exactly. Yeah.
fact, almost all my friends in school, by the time we became 10 years
Mm.
old, there was this district library in our town,
Mm.
and all of us would be given
Yeah.
this library card, and we would go there
Mm. Mm.
every a particular day every week, and we would take our books.
Mm.
That was a regular routine. Yes, it's another thing. We would probably take books on Sindbad and
Mm. Yeah.
all the fictions, but this is a
I
habit.
mean, yeah.
And I think that was extremely important. It's some of the books you cannot take out, so you sit there and read. This reading habit, I feel, was essential.
Mm.
Now often it's because so much information is available and
Available.
it's so easy to access many of these things, we are somehow losing the ability to read and concentrate. So I think it was a very normal thing to do. It was not a privilege. Uh, Membership to the district library was a regular thing for most of the kids of my age in the school.
True, true. That's actually an important point. This information explosion is one of the biggest challenges. Uh, now, with this kind of exposure, um, were you already thinking about the areas you want to focus on right at the end of your school?
Yes. So by the end of the school, I was kind of clear that I was not very interested in engineering
Mm,
and medicine. Um, I don't know exactly
mm.
why. I mean, uh, it's simply that something that I did not find
Fine.
very interesting. The first point was, if I had to go blindfold, I would rather choose something which I have no idea
Right.
about because it has this
Very good.
excitement. But engineering is something that I kept on hearing things from some of the people. One of the cousin I mentioned, he was doing a PhD in engineering.
Nice. Okay.
So I heard some bits and
Mm,
pieces of his life and what he was doing. And really, I did not find that fascination for
mm,
that particular subject. I felt fascinated
mm.
by that life, but not that
That
subject.
subject. Got it.
On the other hand, the medicine, I was interested in
Mm,
biology, but again, just to repeat things, what you learn, and making that your profession, again, it's a gross
yeah,
generalization
yeah,
of
yeah.
what we were
Mm,
given and as an impression of medicine and medical practitioners. It was not exciting to me. And by that time I also started exploring who are these people who wrote those
that's,
geology books, and I found uh, ISM Dhanbad. This
then
is a
was
place where there are some geologists.
mm,
And then I also came across some members in our family which I did not know they were geologists.
mm,
So by that time I was in 12, it was pretty clear in my head, which I did not reveal to
mm.
people, that this is a stream which I would like to at least explore. So I think after the results are out, um, I pretty much
And
announced
then
one day in
yeah,
my family that I'm going to study geology. And I think
they were
there was
shocked.
quite a bit of shock. I said, "Are you sure? Where would you study
Mm,
it?" And some of my seniors from college, from school, they studied in Jadavpur University in humanities, but they actually mentioned that there is a geology
Geology
department.
department.
So it's this random. I mean, I had very little
Yeah.
information, but I simply said that this is what I'm going to pursue. And my family said, "Are you sure?"
Mm,
I said, "Yes." And they said, "Okay." I think a bit of resistance came from my school teachers,
mm, mm.
a part of extended
Family.
family,
Yeah.
because in their mind, again, there are problems of being topper in the school and
Yeah.
all these things, that there is a stereotype.
Yes.
So they were like, "No, no, you cannot do this, you cannot do that." And my father said something very interesting. He said, "Yes, I understand all of your concerns, but it's not in my hand. She's an adult."
Wonderful.
I think that's one point where, if you have to, mark when you felt that you are an adult,
Yes.
that was the point.
Fantastic.
And yes, so after that, we went to Jadavpur, took the forms, got admitted, and
Rest
that's
is
how the
history.
second phase started.
This is fascinating. It also is such a crucial element of anybody's career, right? One is a support. The other one is getting the right information at the right time, because it's a coincidental stuff what you're just mentioning. And the most important thing I want to just stress upon a little bit is the support aspect. Many a times, if there are, of course, parents listening to this thing, they should probably note this important thing, right? See, it is probably better to err on the side of the interest of the kid, uh, because there is a room for correction later on by the kid themselves. I would not even call kid, because you already mentioned the announcement itself was that that person is that, and this is something which is very crucial, right? Growing up, in a lot of households, this is an issue, because there is some kind of a projection of what is necessary for one's career, without actually understanding what is the child interested in. And second point is that, that empowerment uh, is very heartening to actually listen, because for two reasons. One is they're treating you as a grown up, which is a very important thing. Second, which is something which is slightly more important and even more deeper, is that they are not even hesitant about any aspect related to the gender. Because a lot of decisions, one likes it or not, at least in the Indian scenario, the question of she is a girl and is that a right career for her is a question which invariably comes into picture, either explicitly or implicitly. Was there anything of that kind? Because it's clearly the indications are all otherwise, but I just want to know, because that is a very crucial element, and that is a probably an important element also for people listening.
Yes, that's an absolute crucial
Mm, mm,
element. And so far I have talked about only the praise about this little
mm,
town,
mm,
but there are some darker
mm,
elements too.
mm,
Those darker elements are, there is a very strong gender stereotyping. So when I was a kid, I was into active athletics. I was always part of the school team towards when I grew up, maybe in my 13th, 14th.
mm,
I used to represent
mm,
in, I mean, I
mm,
played in district level.
mhm.
Uh,
Athletics.
Athletics.
Nice.
I was part of my school volleyball team and all
Mm,
these.
mm,
But every time there was a reminder that, you know, you have to behave in a certain way. This is the real world. It's not a protected anymore. How you dress, how you show part of your body, everything is being monitored. So I still remember some of the very affectionate
mm.
people in my school. My school was a complete girls' school.
Oh, okay, okay. That is something
Yeah,
which we have.
yes, I
Oh,
forgot to mention. It
okay.
was a complete girls' school. The
Mm,
teachers were extremely affectionate,
mm,
and I think they also had a bit of profiling. So
mm.
uh, generally, a good student and somebody who plays athletics
Mm.
generally is always looked
Looks favorable.
favorably, and some of the mischiefs I
Mm.
used to do was ignored, not to a great
That
extent,
extent,
but at least to
to
some
some extent.
degree.
Okay.
But there was this very strong sense of reminder
Mm.
that you cannot afford to do certain things because of your gender. Clearly remember, every time I would finish a run, I used to do sprints,
Mm.
so
Mm.
100 meters or 200 meters. There would be one or the other. Some of the teachers, including my mother, who was also a teacher
Mm.
in that
Mm.
same school, would remind me, okay, now you are only wearing shorts, so ensure that you have the full covered track suit. Um, don't waste time doing it. It's a public
Mm.
place. These are just subtle points,
Points.
but it just reminds
Reminds
you.
me.
It never lets you forget that you have a gender which does not allow you to do certain things.
I was a boy who used to do run. Nobody told me ever in my life.
Yes. So this is the point
Point
where
exactly.
the difference
Mm.
is made. The worst part of it is, while growing up, this seemed normal.
Mm. Mm.
That's the worst part of it. It's not just the reminder,
Reminder.
it's not just the constant trauma, it's the normalization
Normalization.
of these. So there were a number of my school classmates who got married after their 10th grade. There were a couple of them who were extremely good in studies who got married right after their 12th grade. It was traumatic. But even more traumatic is, when I look
Mm.
back, is I was thinking how lucky I am that I'm not
Not
being
which
pushed.
question.
The thing is, I should not, yes, I'm privileged, but the system is
Yeah.
unfair. So rather than developing this sense of unfairness, we were simply thinking that how privileged
Based
we
we
are.
are.
And I think that's
That's
one of the darker parts of a small society.
wonderfully put. This is a very, very crucial point, what you're mentioning. What is supposed to be a normalized principle of a freedom of a person actually has been elevated to a privilege. Okay, that's so very well put in with an example you've given it, which also percolates, unfortunately, right? Because every step, let's say a woman is taking, is now considered as a step towards a privilege. If you look at it in a generalized principle, actually it should be a normal step, right? It should be by default something which happens. Vis-a-vis, if you contrast that to a man, in fact, it doesn't really come into picture at all. I would not say the situation is the same, but the thing is that uh, there are so many kind of hurdle-less paths,
Yeah, I
which
mean,
is otherwise very, very prevalent in a
yeah, I
woman's
mean,
life.
it's exactly the same when a man gets compliments. Oh,
Mm.
wow, look how caring the dad is
Mm.
about their kids. It's
No,
normal. It doesn't,
precisely right.
it doesn't require extra praising. Yes, it's the unfair society. Uh,
No, I kind of get it. Being a father, I can relate to this particular point, because if you look at the way parenting is done, a normal part of a dad's kind of responsibility is elevated into something, some extraordinary thing. I agree with you. Anyway, we will actually now proceed to your Jadavpur experience, where probably you are now seeding your kind of expertise as a geologist. Give us a picture there. Your bachelor's there.
yeah, it was wonderful. Again, because it was the first time I was out of my home,
Hmm, hmm.
but I was still living with some of my family members in Calcutta, so it was not complete.
Oh, you are not in hostel.
No, I was not in
Oh
hostel.
man,
So, but it was kind of. I mean, I think I set my boundaries at
boundaries.
the very
Nice.
beginning, and the second one was throughout my life, because I grew up in a not so normal, usual
Certainly.
surroundings. I think the general impression about me in my extended society was this person is a bit crazy. So a lot of norms they didn't even expect from me. So I think there is a huge emotional stress if you want to live up to somebody's expectation.
Expectation. Yeah.
I was not expected to a lot of
Mm,
things, and that gave me a lot of freedom. The freedom was kind of hinged on this single word that you are an adult, so that
mm.
what it implies is you are on your own.
On.
Any mistakes you made, it's your responsibility. So I think that's kind of put the boundaries around.
As an youngster, probably that is okay to live with, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to actually ask you a little bit more, because see, that is the freedom which is necessary for somebody to explore this space. Many a times, by curbing that, you neither are giving them the freedom to do what they want to do. The second thing is, probably you're also not making a proper choice for that person,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, please continue. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. So, so when I first started going to Jadavpur, it was an exciting
Mm,
place. I had geology honors, and then I had mathematics and physics
mm,
as my what we used to call past subjects.
yeah.
And we had very good teachers in, especially in geology and physics. Some of them
Mm.
became my colleagues when I eventually joined other
I
ISER.
said, oh wow, okay,
Um,
nice.
and some of my classmates, whom we used to take same classes, same
Mm.
mathematics class, but they were physics honor student and we were geology honor student. Some of those physics friends became my colleague in
Nice.
ISER. So it's kind of an interesting time.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So in geology also there were very good teachers, not everybody,
Mm.
but I think that's the norm. Uh, the other aspect of it which I really loved about it, there were hardcore field trips. There are a number of field trips which developed an early appreciation of how complicated problems are when you actually look at it in nature. It was not simplified only because it can be solvable. It was presented as complicated, dirty, with a lot of alternative explanations, but this is how it is. I think that's a very important aspect of how geology or earth science should be communicated.
Communicated.
That it is not simple, but that's the fun of it. Um, the other part of the Jadavpur experience was, unlike lack of exposure in a small tiny town, here we are where from all over West Bengal people are flocking to this university, and everybody had good results because at that point of time Jadavpur was one of the most sought after place in the state, and especially people who wanted to study in general stream, not engineering and not in medicine. So there were a number of people who had offers from engineering and medicine. They simply decided that they are not interested. So it was an exciting place, and in geology, we were 26 of us, and because we would go to field trips together and spend a lot of time in college together, we had very good understanding of each other. Uh, Not necessarily we agreed to each other at all the time, but it was a place where we understood where people are coming from. So, a lot of difference of opinion, but eventually we managed to work together. So, a couple of our teachers had this favorite point or favorite point to make would be that they would go to the field and where we would work in groups. They would ensure that people who are friends, they will not be put in the same group. So you are forced to work with people who are not your friends, but you have to work with. And I think that was an excellent teaching. That you cannot always uh, get to choose your colleagues or your co-workers. We fought, but we also managed to eventually fight with our friends when we are presenting the results because it was a competition.
Absolutely.
The other point which I benefited greatly was some of my seniors and some of my classmates, we would study. We would do this group study. And for all the classes which we would attend, there were great teachers and they would benefit. But then there were classes where not so great teachers. Our aim would be to understand what is a good textbook. And then we would go through the textbook. So I had a friend with whom she was my best study partner and also a very good friend of mine. So we would study anything and everything if we can find out a textbook. And often we would joke that we excelled in those courses where the teacher was not that great. Because then it was up to us to understand in and out of the things and connect stuff. So that was wonderful experience.
This is something very important, very critical issue. As researchers, we realize that the topics which you take interest to explore by yourself are the ones which tend to actually stick with you, rather than, even sometimes, even if it is very interesting, if it is taught well, it is a great pleasure to sit in that class, but you would probably at the end of the day extract more if you have taken your own initiative and do things. This also means you made two important points. One is that the importance of field trips. See, unlike other areas of sciences, uh, to a large extent, geology is meaningful only with field trips. In my opinion, at least, you would probably be having better insight into that. Maybe in some aspects of biology also it would be good. Unfortunately, not many biology education systems, at least the one which I went through, did not have that field trip kind of thing. There were some demonstrations, etc. uh, Tell me a little bit about that aspect. while doing, let's say, undergraduate education, I think this is something which really attracts a lot of people, a lot of them who have inclination to be outdoors. There is a lot of interesting research you can do outdoors. You don't need to hole up yourself in a laboratory like what I do in a dark room, which is a complete opposite. But it's also fascinating for me, to be very frank, because microscopy, lasers, etc. But of course, you can also bring things from the field and also look at it. But here, in your own stuff, what you do, and as part of your education, you will have to actually go out and explore. The questions are answered only if you are, outside. Give us a flavor of that. Give us also the flavor of why this is important, why field trips are so important, which you do conduct. I will also link to some videos of Devapriya and her team actually going to Pashan. There's a beautiful hill close to our institution where they've done some very interesting exploration. Tell us about that importance of the trips.
I think geology, earth science, however you call it,
Mm,
in a broader scale, two aspects which are very important in these disciplines and almost unique
mm,
uh, is the concept of time and the concept of
mm,
scale. They sound very mundane, but it's actually to understand something, the enormity of both scale and time is not something that you can get in a limited space and time boundary in your
mm,
lab.
mm.
So when you go to the field, that's the first time you get an appreciation. You look at a mountain, the first question that comes to your mind, these are solid
So,
rocks, how come they are bending? This kind of overwhelming sense of probably the physics principles are not working
mm,
is the first thing that strikes you. Again, you can show diagrams, you can show, pictures. They don't do justice.
mm, mm,
You have to be there to appreciate what you are talking about. A deformation that is taking place at a scale of a few thousand kilometers
mm.
can be traceable in a microscopic slide made up out of those rocks in a nanometer scale.
Wow.
This magnitude
Magnitude.
of scale and scalability of features is almost impossible to communicate unless you have seen it in the field, came back to the lab, and seen the same rocks under thin section in the microscope.
Wonderful.
So, this span
Pan. Yeah.
is important, and that appreciation has to be there to design questions, to design approaches to answer those questions, and also to point out what are the assumptions which we can never validate.
Validate. Yes.
So, all of these are parts and parcel of how you conduct research in earth sciences. Similarly, I think there are streams of biology also,
Mm.
ecology, and marine biology. They also involve a lot of field work. So, I feel that for whatever reason, we have restricted our idea of a scientist to a male wearing a white
White
coat
coat. Yeah.
in a very sophisticated glass paneled room. Just open up your mind. Scientists come in all colors and
Colors.
creed and race and gender and forms and
One shapes.
shapes, and that's the beauty of it.
Absolutely fantastic, fantastic. This is a very crucial point. Uh, Now we'll proceed into the trajectory of your career. Now that you're finishing up Jadavpur and then you move to IT.
Yes.
Yeah, how did that transition happen?
Yes. So in Jadavpur, another very
Mm,
important
mm,
aspect that happened, we had a course on principles of paleontology.
mm,
Uh, Paleontology is what
mm.
I specialized
Yeah.
eventually,
Yeah.
and our teacher was very good.
For our listeners, could you tell what is paleontology, just
So,
in a couple of?
paleontology or
Mm,
paleobiology is
mm.
the study of past life, primarily done through studying fossils.
Very nice.
So, our teacher, he was a paleontologist and he was also an active researcher. He could convey his passion about this long
Mm,
lost life
mm,
and how do you reconstruct it back. And unlike many other colleges at that point of time, he first showed us that it has nothing to do with memorization. You can forget names of species and genera and things. What it matters is you try to look at the question, what is the trigger and what is the
Yes,
essential
yeah.
expression of it, looking at a long term with some of these things not getting preserved. There is a hole in the data and all of these complexities. What can you infer and how reliable is your inference? So
Inference.
I think that was one point where I was really fascinated. And some of the field trips, and those field trips are actually done on recent times. So where we would see organisms interact at a live
Life
scale,
scale.
and we had to sort of imagine what are the aspects of it which will get preserved and what are the aspects of it which will never
Yeah,
get
with
preserved,
preserve.
and what would be the records like eventually. I think those, that class as well as that field trip, they were fascinating. And by that time I was already towards the end of my bachelor's, and I was kind of certain that at least this is worth a
Was a
shot, and
start.
I would try to see if it works. It's also a time when many of us were also trying to explore other places. Uh, Nothing bad about Jadavpur. It was one of the very good institutes at that point of time. It's simply that I also like to see a change
Change
of
of place.
place
Yeah, yeah.
and what others can be offered.
Anyway, you are an explorer.
Anyway, I was an
Equally,
explorer.
right?
So at that point of time, there was not a centralized exam. There would be one exam for IIT Bombay, one exam for IIT Kharagpur. I sat in both the exams. I mean, got selected, but decided to go to IIT Bombay. Part of the reason was it was far away
Far away
from
from.
Calcutta. So not a
Yeah,
very academic
yes,
reason, but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
simply something that I liked. Um, and also, by the time we were ending my BSc, we had a very strong group of friends. It was a bit sad to leave all of them, but it was also something that I wanted to change
Change.
the place, because we became very comfortable in the system. We knew exactly how it works, and so there was a bit of saturation, and I wanted to change.
Yeah, that's important, right? Because you also go out of your comfort zone, and that probably diversifies your network and also your thoughts. That's equally important thing. So all throughout, I assume you had a pretty good support from your family, right?
Yes, they all they would ask at this point is, are you okay? Is there anything major going on that you would like to share with us?
You're a single child.
I am a single child.
Okay, that's
And it was pretty much about it. They would
fantastic.
visit Calcutta
Hmm.
maybe once or twice a year. Would have Will have good time. I'll talk a bit about my friends, but I think they were very
Excellent.
accepting that the fact that now is the time when I'm not going to reveal everything that's going on in my life, and that's fine. It's
That's very good. Excellent. So now tell me the transition to Mumbai.
Yes, so I went to Mumbai, IIT Bombay, and I was floored by the first look at it because it was like densely, it, I think we went there sometime around July, uh, and it was raining heavily, and we entered the gate, and it was all trees, large trees, making a canopy, and it was constantly raining. That had such a
Beautiful.
beautiful appearance.
Okay.
It's a wild place.
Yes,
uh,
yes.
I fell in love with
Yeah,
it, that
nice.
the campus. uh, and for the first time I started to live in the hostel, and
Hostel.
which I was fascinated. The
So this was applied geology, right? That's what
Yes,
you
yes.
did.
So at that point of time, IIT Bombay only offered
Hmm.
MSc in applied geology, so that was the only
It's still
choice.
on. The program is
Yeah,
still on, right?
the program is still
Wonderful.
there. They also started offering MScs in other
Subject. Yeah,
subdisciplines,
yeah.
but during our time, that was the only option we had.
What was the class size roughly?
Class size was 12, so
That's
it was a
excellent.
very
Very, very
small
exactly.
class size, and when I had a transition to Kolkata, it was people from all around West Bengal, and this is the time when, for the first time, I had friends from all over all over India,
India.
and that was another revelation that how difference in culture there is, and so it was really great. Um, in terms of teaching, I think. Uh, I was not too thrilled about all aspects of teaching, but what it taught me is to come out of that complacent attitude that everything is negotiable. Jadavpur at that point of time, it was teachers were very, very friendly, compassionate. So if I needed extra time to complete an assignment, they would give it. They would not think about it. But in IIT, it was if it's
Hard life.
12 noon deadline, it's not 12:01 deadline. So I think that training was also needed. The other aspect of training which I found wonderful and we needed that was the computer literacy. I never used a computer before. It sounds very unusual.
Exactly.
But that was the case. We had a computer course in Jadavpur, but it was mostly theoretical. If we
You're
would
right,
write
right.
stuff. But this was the time when I think we are talking about 2002. So emails and chat and all these things are pretty much coming in, and not in all the places but definitely in IIT Bombay. So there were computer rooms which you can use. There was computer room in the hostels where you can use. So a part of it probably we also use too much without knowing good from bad, and but it definitely pushed us to be comfortable with this medium. There was a computer programming course that I found one of the very important courses that I took at that point of time. It was open to all BTech first years and the MSc first years, and it was a tough competition.
That is always the usual
Yes,
thing.
but it was wonderful because it also shows this aspect, how to think logically, more importantly, how to frame every aspect of your logical thinking into almost like a binary option. That clarity of thinking needs to be there at some point of time. Unfortunately, our schools didn't have it. In college, it was only a bit of it. So this was the time when we picked it up.
Very nice. Very, very fascinating. See, now you are into the realm of the higher education. Before we switch over to the full research board, where you go into research problems in a very serious way, uh, I want to just integrate this whole time period of what you have now spent and draw a few lessons out of that, because that is actually a very good way to look at that whole point what we have covered until now. What were the main kind of indicators or the lessons what you kind of derive out of that part of your life, especially MSc and below in that sense? I'm not talking about the research part of it, because clearly you can see that there is an exposure to various different environments. There are probably some broad lessons you can draw out of it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think broad lessons. The first one is if you love something, you stick to it. Uh, there would be dull moments. There would be really painful moments where things are not working out. Some problems you cannot, maybe you can see the problem, but you just cannot wrap your head around. But it's just this love that you have is going to drive you through it. If you are following something just to please others or just to meet somebody else's expectation, these are the points in time which is very difficult to survive.
Right. Yes.
So that I felt was one of the major things. The second one is being independent. There would be bad decisions, but those decisions would be mine.
Very fantastic.
Uh, It also comes with a bit of loneliness, because it's your decision.
Decision, exactly.
You cannot blame anyone. But at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable in your
Sure.
shoes, and you have to be used to this solitude. Some of the best decisions I made are in solitude, where you are not influenced by anything else.
This is a lesson of a lifetime, right? That is an important thing, because this is a very crucial point what you're mentioning, because the decisions what one makes by themselves, even if it goes wrong, you have an explanation for that. You have reconciliation, right? Because you know what was the framework through which you took a decision, which means that you don't have to search for an explanation. It's an inherent thing which is already there. This is true for any person, for any part of the life, by the way. This is a very important point what you mentioned. So which also means that you are taking this particular decision with complete confidence, because the hindsight is 2020. You will never know how things work out. But it also means that you're really focused. That is what actually one can see, that you, for a person to make a decision to take up geology, which is generally not the mainstream, so to speak, and with an environment in which you're growing up, where you have good exposure, tells that you actually have that particular focus kind of element into your thought process, right? Because that has really taken you to the stage where you are, just because of the fact that you took those decisions. That is a lesson I can at least drive out of this. But that is something which is very important. When I just asked that there were only 12 people in a class, vis-a-vis, let's say, take even in something like a BTech class, it will be hundreds, if not thousands, in a class. The amount, it's not only about the number of people in that class, but it is also a crowded area, which means that there is lesser kind of room for you to express yourself. In that way, this is a remarkable decision, right? Because maybe it is not deliberate, maybe you have just taken your own interest and pursued it further. But lo and behold, you actually are exploring something somebody else has lost it out totally, just because of the fact that they have been herded into some stream where everybody is thinking. So everybody doesn't have a choice. I should really bring a caveat here. Like you probably were also fortunate to have parents who really gave you a lot more room. So this is a fascinating element. So now we'll shift gears a little bit into the second phase, to talk a little bit about how you made the transition to US, and what kind of work you did, and again the lessons what you extracted out of it. Yeah.
Uh, Again, I'm really grateful to IIT Bombay. Some of my seniors, um, who were there during 2002, 2004, it was a fun place. Apart from academics, we would go for rain treks. Almost every other weekend, we will play badminton for the whole night. So all of these things were fun.
Welcome to the real
Yes, yeah, yeah.
world.
And there were people who already started applying to the US, to Europe. So when I was in Jadavpur, I did not really know how to go about it. Let's say if I want to do a PhD in
Yeah.
science, I really didn't know what are the steps.
Steps. Yeah.
Um, so here are these bunch of people, maybe 1 or 2 years senior to me. They simply laid out the steps, and they said, okay, these are the things that you have to do. You have to pick up your speed in typing, because this is
It's
something that
something
you
you
would
will
require
look
in
at.
GRE.
Yeah.
And I still remember asking that, how do you do that? They, with a poker face, they said, you chat. I said, whom should I chat with? They said, to complete strangers. So this was hilarious. I mean, when I look back, but I took it very seriously. So
Seriously.
I actually started typing. So for a person who never used a computer before, to get a decent typing speed in 1 year,
Yeah.
I think thanks to chat.
Chat. It's very, very interesting, fascinating.
And they also told me that this is how GRE happens, and this is how you apply to different universities. And unlike other disciplines in earth sciences, you have to have your at least inclination of which subdiscipline in earth sciences you want to do a PhD, and you should contact some of these potential supervisors. You cannot simply expect to write to the department and expect to get selected. And by this time, I was pretty confident that I want to do paleontology. Uh, so because you mentioned something that it's not mainstream. So talking about mainstream, when I was appearing in Jadavpur for entering,
Entrance.
there was not entrance exam. It's simply you submit your
Submit your.
documents
Yeah.
and the clerk stamps and
Yeah.
it's done, if you are in the list. So the clerk said, you have such good marks,
Oh, yeah.
why are you going to study geology? You should study physics.
See that.
That's the first point. When I went to IIT Bombay, when I said that I am going to pursue paleontology, some of my friends and seniors said, "Hey, you have very good grades in your class. Why are you planning to study paleontology? It's not, the top of earth science. So this
Exactly.
hierarchy and
Hierarchies.
caste system
Cast.
is there even in scientific disciplines."
Absolutely right.
So,
Absolutely right. You know, I have to say this in spite of the fact that I am a physicist, because you were absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. That's another reason why I wanted to highlight this particular point. It's so critical because it is also something unique. I have to re-emphasize this to my audience here, that it's not an easy decision to make unless you actually have a really strong conviction. And second is support, right? Because
yeah.
see, without the conviction, support really is nothing, because you really don't know what you're going to do. The other way around is also an equally important thing. Yeah, please proceed. Yeah.
Especially when I decided to go for GRE and the full thing, the support became very critical because it required a lot of money.
Money. Yeah. Yeah.
So very hesitantly, I reached out to my parents. In fact, I chatted with some of my cousins that, do you think this is something that we can even ask? I don't know how much like they can afford, and so I think they helped me to reach out.
Yeah.
And these are, for me, this was difficult conversation because I already felt that it's a lot of
Burden.
burden and investment, and uh, in some sense there is no immediate
Yeah.
return.
Absolutely.
Being a parent now, I understand that yes, these are things that if we can, we would happily invest, but I was not a parent then, so it was difficult to understand this. So I reached out to my parents, and my parents laid out a very realistic thing that we can afford up to this point. So you decide within this how much you can
Manage.
manage. So I realized that I can take GRE, TOEFL, and probably apply to a few places, not a lot. And I went ahead with the plan. Uh, there were hiccups in the plan. The first series of applications that I sent to 4 schools with whom I already contacted, and the supervisors were interested. Um, in order to reduce the financial burden, what I decided that I will send the entire application package, which was like paper copy, to one of our seniors in the States, and she will send
Send
these
it.
to individual places. That reduces the postal charges. But when she received it, it was all torn.
Oh, yeah.
So 4 places were out
Out
of
of.
question because the deadlines were over. So there were 3 more places whose deadlines were a bit farther, and I was really wanted to continue in Michigan because the potential supervisor, his research interest really
Yeah,
appealed me.
please. Okay.
So it was thankfully one of the other 3 where the deadlines was a
Therefore.
farther away. but he didn't respond to my initial emails for quite some time. Later, he wrote back to me saying that he was in sabbatical, so he was not regular in terms of checking things. And so eventually, I applied, and I got in. So that was one of the very, very high moments
Moments
of
of you,
my,
obviously.
almost like the academic
Okay.
journey, and it was a good school, and yes, so that's where it ended. And
Ended.
I was very happy when I was leaving IIT Bombay.
So how was the transition to US
Uh,
socially?
it was a lot of change.
Change.
First time flying.
Mm.
I've never seen an airplane before.
Yeah.
Uh, Long journey.
You
Uh,
went alone?
I went alone.
Nice.
Made some mistakes in terms of dates and times. Ended
Mm.
up reaching there a day prior to what I was thinking. So there were
Always.
some, yeah, initial goof ups.
Uh,
But it was a place a bit overwhelming,
mm.
because generally many of the universities you have a department with one or two paleontologists. There we were had five or six paleontologists. There was almost like a complete museum
Mm.
with all these paleontologists.
Exactly.
So there was a very vibrant group,
Mm.
and they were doing research in all aspects, and there was a very good peer group.
Mm.
Uh, Climate wise, it was a major transition.
Mission, yeah.
Almost 8 months a year it snowed.
Oh, yeah, Michigan is quite
It's
cold.
very cold, but it's just this,
But
charm
again,
of
there's a river.
living alone,
Yes.
a small town, well connected places
And there's a
by
river
bus
too.
and a river. I enjoyed it.
Enjoy. Okay, okay. That's fantastic, fantastic. So, very briefly, tell us about the research problem you worked there.
Yes. So when I went there, my supervisor Tom, he basically laid it out very clearly that you are a PhD student. That means you are a peer. You are a scientist in the process of, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
becoming an
Academician,
academician.
yeah.
So don't expect me to design problems for
Mm.
you. You are going to design your own problem.
Mm.
I'm going to help you.
Mm.
And he ensured that he is not deviating from this first commitment till the end.
Mm.
So I designed my own question, obviously with lots of help from him. But a major difference was, uh, in paleontology, often people focus on a specific group. And the group, the model system
Mm.
he worked on, I didn't work on it. I worked on a different model system, which he was not very familiar with,
Really.
and he was absolutely fine with it.
Mm.
He encouraged it. That uh, understanding, giving the freedom, uh, was fascinating for
Fascinating.
me, worked out very well for me. So, the general broad outline that I tried to start looking at was, if you look at morphological or behavioral response of marine groups,
Mm.
how do they respond to major triggers of evolution? One of the major trigger is predation. So if you change predation patterns, how do they respond to it? Now it sounds fairly simple, especially in a biological
Mm.
context. The challenge is predation. If you think about a marine predation, a fish gulping another fish,
Mm.
you don't
Mm.
get a record.
Yes,
So the
because that's
first challenge is to find a thing which can give you quantitative record. It's not one of a kind. It cannot be one record in millions of
mm.
years.
Mm.
It has to be something which you can find in plenty, because then only you can do statistical modeling of
Mm.
the population level responses. So that's why we settled on a very unimpressive
Mm.
looking fossil record, where if you find a clam or a snail, even in the sea beach, you will find a tiny hole in some of them.
Mm. Mm.
Those holes are predatory drill holes. So there are some carnivorous snails which drill hole and leave it. You get those records in the fossils. as far
Wow.
back as 70 million years, even farther
Is
back.
it?
Yes.
Wow,
So
remarkable.
then this can tell you a lot of stuff.
But how do you know it has drilled it? In the sense, is there any specific way in which it does that?
Yes. So these snails, they have an accessory boring organ which they use as a screw. So they drill
Wow.
it, they pour a little bit of acid, and which
And
makes it a perfect drill hole. And the morphology of the drill hole, how it looks like, gives you a clear indication of who made it.
wow, fascinating. So
So
the cross check is that you also have this clue of that acid,
you
or
don't,
is it all
it's all gone,
gone?
but you, some of these families still exist today, so you can actually look at the modern counterpart and develop your hypothesis and then test it back over the long term. So that appeared to be a perfect model system where I can do experiments. I can design what are the records which are going to be there in the fossil record, and what are the records which I can never figure out, because if it
Hmm.
involves soft tissues, it's not going to be preserved. And then you can test all these questions which require a long term
Hmm.
pattern. And that appealed to me, and we started doing some experiment. I was called to one of the marine labs. It's called Friday Harbor Marine Lab,
Hmm.
off of Washington,
Towards the
in the San Juan
west coast.
archipelago. Yes.
West coast.
So there I spent 2 months in one of the summer, and we had a sea table, flowing seawater, and all these organisms that you can simply pick up from the live organisms that you can pick up through a boat ride. We will bring them, do these experiments. So one of the experiments that I did was to understand that what was the influence of a trophic structure. So you don't only have prey and then predator
Hmm.
on top of
Hmm.
it. There are other predators which are eating these predators
Predators.
of the prey. So it's a
Hierarchical.
hierarchical system. So the question that I was trying to understand is, what happens if the top predator population increases? What happens to the record
Record.
of the prey?
Hmm.
Um, and in doing so, we can take a look at the fossil over long term, that how these structure of the ecosystem influenced the prey mortality over time. And you can do that by finding out some signature of how these drill holes are made, how many times they were unsuccessful,
Unsuccessful.
how many times they were successful, which part of the uh, entire shale they were targeting.
Hmm.
Because if they are threatened, they generally abandon. If they want to do it very quickly, they basically go after the thinnest
Thinnest
part,
part. Hmm.
which may incur some risk for the predator. So it's basically, you design experiments, you do it, and then you think back,
Back.
how would it look like in the fossil record? So that was pretty much in what I tried to do in my PhD.
Fascinating. Fascinating. People who are looking for a direction, this is one. No, because a lot of students in science uh, actually have very little understanding of the fact that you can use tools of science and bring in all components of PCMB in this. This is
Yes.
precisely one of the ways in which you can effectively use the knowledge of physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, even more than that. Geology, geography, history
Yes.
also can be brought in.
Especially during my PhD, the projects that I did,
Mm,
definitely this kind of made me wear another hat of a biologist,
balance, exactly.
because I was basically doing the work that marine biologists or marine
Amazing.
ecologists do. I was also looking at hydrodynamic behavior of the shells when you put in a drill hole and not a drill hole, because that affects their transportation and how they will get preserved. So this was basically, I was using biomechanics and a
Fantastic.
bit of, elementary
Uh,
classical mechanics.
Mechanics.
So, and then with all of these data, you go back, but you have to kind of find and establish it with a statistical certainty.
Certainty.
So you use all your mathematical knowledge, a bit of statistical modeling, to establish the point. And finally, none of these would make sense unless you can write it coherently. So I think communication tops it off. So it's everywhere,
Eh,
it's the same thing.
Wonderful, wonderful. This actually gives a kind of a broader, complete picture of how these kind of important areas of research, because it has deep connection to earth and climate sciences. That's the department in which Devapriya is also housed within the ISET system, which is also probably one of the most important challenges for humanity to understand it. It's not only about solving climate change problem, which is probably, in my opinion, it's the biggest futuristic and also contemporary problem, given the enormity of that. A second is also that the usefulness of the knowledge, that is so very nicely kind of brought into this kind of foray, because without having to bring in any component, you would not have the complete understanding of the problem. It is a great way to also utilize knowledge and apply it. Because people, if they are looking for alternates from engineering and medicine, uh, even from mainstream, let's say physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, which actually are foundational, but you can see there is a very important option. Somehow that notion is not still prevalent, right? It has to somehow change, and I hope this podcast will help. This. So now that you're finishing your PhD, what are the next steps you're thinking about, and what are the questions you're asking in terms of how you're going to take your career? Were you already thinking about a career in academics?
Uh, Yes, I so as I mentioned that University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, it had a very strong
Hmm.
department of. At that point, I think the name was geological sciences. Now it's earth and
Hmm.
environmental sciences, and there was a kind of a general atmosphere where everybody is thinking about research questions, problems. But at the same time, there was a number of students in geology who were also choosing their career in oil industry.
Hmm.
And very unusually, I did two internships in some of the top ranking oil industry.
Oh, is it?
Yes, those were interesting stints.
In
Uh,
Shell, you
in
did?
one in Exxon,
Exxon, oh my word, okay.
another one in BP.
VP.
Yeah, so
So for Exxon, you went to Texas or somewhere?
for both of them, I went to Houston.
Houston, yeah.
Yeah, Texas.
Mm.
So the first one was just for
Mm.
fun. Uh, it They used to conduct these campus
Mm.
interviews, and the person who came for the interview, she was very interesting. She was unusual. She was
Mm.
interesting. She asked me a lot of questions about my research,
Mm.
which I was always fascinated
Yeah.
to talk about. And then she asked me, "Your do you think your research has any relevance to oil industry?"
Mm.
And I mean, to be very frank, it has nothing.
Mm.
So I told her that it has nothing to do with that. But I use these quantitative methods. I have a solid training in geology, so I think I can
Mm.
manage the
Regular.
regular assignments that are given to me. And then the second question she asked was, "Your CV at this point looks very focused on academic trajectory.
Trajectory. Okay.
Why do you want to do this?"
Uh,
So I think again, I told her that I heard it's a good
mm.
money. Second point is it's only an internship,
Mm.
and I would feel slightly uncertain to go to academia, even if I'm 90% certain, without even exploring how the industry
Industry.
research is and how the industry atmosphere is. Maybe I might find it interesting.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I was so surprised when
Mm.
I got the offer, because I thought that nobody
Then,
would take a person like that who is
yeah.
not committing
Yeah.
100%
Yeah.
to follow this trajectory. So I was pleasantly surprised,
Surprised.
and it was an interesting experience.
Okay.
I got exposed to the industry practice. I was not doing anything related to
Mm.
paleontology. I was actually looking at seismic sections
Section.
and interpreting it. It simply gave me this confidence at the end of 3 months that even if
Mm.
I have to do something which is not my core passion,
Mm.
or I don't have exact training for that. Given some time, I can pick up, and I think that was a very good
Good
training,
trade. Yeah.
and that sort of built my confidence. Also, I liked it. There were a lot of people in Houston. Some of them were from my college,
Oh, okay.
so I could reconnect
Correct.
to some of these things.
Nice.
So it was fun.
Nice.
But I came back. In fact,
Came back to India or
no, came back to Ann
Michigan?
Arbor.
Michigan.
In fact, there was a tragedy around this
Mm.
time. My father passed away. So while I was in this internship, so I had to fly to India and then eventually go back. I could not spend much time here because it was, again, as I said, that I had a sort of a contract that I have to
Mm.
finish the internship, and it was the last year of my PhD. So I also had to finish my
Finishing.
PhD in the next 1 year.
Mm.
So that was a stressful
Mm.
time,
Mm.
but it was made a lot easier because I already had my husband with me there who was also pursuing PhD in mathematics. So having another person who is also going through the same kind of academic routine
Mm.
helps, and we share a lot of similar interests and
Interest.
connections. So that was definitely very helpful. And then after 1 year, I defended, and I still remember uh, my PhD supervisor introducing me, saying that uh, here is Devapriya,
Mm.
who does not work in the same field that I do. And
Wow.
I take it as a compliment
Compliment. Nice.
because he always wanted that direction.
Mm.
He would often say that, do you really like to compete in the same grant proposal where you and I are writing
Yeah.
the same kind of under the same umbrella? I don't
Mm.
want to make clones of myself. You figure
Very
out
correct.
a direction
Mm.
and I'll always be there. So I'm really grateful to that. So right after this, when I was applying for postdoc
Mm.
positions, this is the time right after the market collapsed.
Mm. Yes, yes.
So a lot of my postdoc offered literally vanished within a week. And so I was basically left with a few
Uh,
options. uh, and as an international student in the US, we don't have a lot of flexibility in
Flexibility. Yeah.
terms
Yeah.
of how long we can stay, how long we can look for jobs, and what kind of jobs we can do.
Mm. Mm.
So a number of my American friends, they had to take a year off or kind of defer their PhD
Mm.
graduation. My department was very supportive. When they came to know about this situation, they said, you could still uh, think of this.
Mm.
I was a TA for a number of years,
Mm.
and they said, because of your TA performance, we would be happy to give you some
Extend.
extension. uh, Around the same time, I also got an offer for a 3-month internship
Mm.
in BP, and I also had some possibility of a fellowship
Mm.
in University of Vienna. So I thought to take this chance,
Mm.
and I went ahead and took this 3-month BP
Repeat.
internship again in Houston. Now, during this time, I was also applying for all kinds of places.
Yeah.
One place that I applied was in University of West Georgia.
Mm.
It's a small uh,
Mm.
university, primarily had undergraduate studies, and they wanted paleontologists for a year. It's a limited
Mm.
term position, and I applied for it. And I was confident that there are so many people who are applying for
Mm.
these jobs, and that too at the heart of southern US,
Mm.
what colloquially called the Bible Belt.
Bible. Yes,
Um,
yes.
Chances are very slim.
Yeah.
But I was quite surprised when I got an interview call.
Mm.
I went there,
Mm.
I met the colleagues, and I got selected. So that was very,
Very,
very
very
surprising.
surprising.
Um, So I spent 1 year there.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Yeah.
nice, nice. Yes,
Uh,
yes, I see that. That is actually in a place which is actually in Georgia, or
Yeah, it is in Georgia.
yeah,
It's far slightly away from Atlanta.
Atlanta. Okay,
It's
okay.
a small town called Carrollton.
Uh huh. Okay.
And the day I joined, I think after a week when I went to some places, everybody knew who I was. So everybody said,
It's
"Oh, you joined the
new,
university."
nice,
So
nice.
I was that
That's
conspicuous in that small town.
wonderful, wonderful. America has its own charm in a different way, right? Because that is something which is excellent place to be working as a professional. It's a
Yes, but also it comes with another experience.
yes.
So when I was teaching this historical geology and
Mm-hmm.
physical geology, the department was absolutely great.
Mm,
Another friend of mine who also finished his
mm,
paleontology PhD also joined with me.
mm,
So we were very close
mm,
friends. So it was like two northerners
yeah,
kind of roaming
roaming around.
around, um, very
Correct.
conspicuous. So when I started teaching, I could see there are a lot of students.
Mm,
Obviously, there was it was at the beginning difficult even to understand the accent.
mm,
I got used to it. I'm sure that they also went through
yeah,
the
yeah.
same progression, that it was difficult. Part of the historical geology involves a lot about the age of the earth,
Mm,
the concept of evolution, which
a
are not
lot.
very agreeable
Yeah.
to certain religious belief. And I had interactions about that. So
Mm,
there were students in my class, some of them are returning students,
mm, mm,
probably of my same age,
mm.
and they would come and tell me that, we understand your situation.
Mm.
Initially I didn't even understand the statement.
Statement.
So they would say that we understand your situation, you came from a very poor country, so you have to do whatever it takes to survive,
Mm.
and that's why we understand why you are teaching
Tish.
these things, but we will pray for you.
Oh,
I am
well.
We are sure that you are not a bad person. It's just, you are so it kind of gave me this flavor
Skinned.
of, you know very staunch belief
Waves.
system exists everywhere in the world. It doesn't have a nationality. And when you are a rational person
Mm,
or you are practicing
mm.
rationality, your challenges are the same
Same as.
across nationality, across national border. So that was interesting
Wow,
experience.
that is actually. I've never had any of my guests actually having this experience because it's a unique experience. I totally see the point, especially the I don't even call it as a debate, but just for the sake of semantics, it's the evolutionary versus creationalist debate, where the other the evolutionary viewpoint actually is not even in a theory. It's actually a proved fact now. But there's so much of contention and kind of debate related to that in US, especially even today, right? It's still on because it's kind of split into political kind of debate rather than a scientific debate, which means that you were already thinking about kind of moving away from that place, or what was your thought process then?
I mean, anyway, this place, the contract came for 1 year. So I knew that I have to move on. There was a possibility of contract renewal, but
Mm,
I was kind of getting not very comfortable. One point
mm.
was this. But the other point was, at that point of time, there was also a change in the gun laws,
Oh yeah.
which makes that I think there was slight amendment about the gun laws, which
Mm,
would mean that there is a higher possibility of somebody carrying a gun even in a classroom in the university. And I was quite upset by it. Not that I can have any say in it,
yeah, yeah,
but as
of
an
course.
individual, I felt threatened. I wrote to the president
Mm,
of the university. I wrote to the dean
mm,
that as a member of the
mm,
community, as a faculty
mm,
member, when I don't have the right to carry any firearm
mm,
because I'm on
mm.
visa, in some way you are not ensuring
ensuring
my protection. Uh, Nothing happened,
happen.
but these were kind of making me a bit uncertain, and I was looking for options.
Mm,
One option came around was the same University of Vienna fellowship
mm,
for an extended stay
mm,
of 10 months
mm,
and then possibility for renewal, uh, was still active
mm,
there. And around that same time, my husband told me that there are institutes in India
mm,
which are coming up called ICER. And during his visit,
mm.
he went to ICER Kolkata and gave a talk.
Okay,
I
okay.
and he also mentioned they even have a department of geology
Geology.
or geological sciences. Maybe you can consider. So this is the situation
Situation.
where I was thinking about all these possibilities, and so in one of the winters of 2000, I think 2009, I came down. I visited ICER Kolkata. I contacted a few people, and they said yes. Well, you can come down, give a talk. I went down, gave a
Mm,
talk, and there was nothing much at that point of time. We are talking about ICER Kolkata,
mm,
which is not in
mm,
Kolkata,
mm.
and it was still in this uh, existing building of a previous institute,
Institution, yeah.
and it was like a makeshift
Mm,
arrangement. But when I went there and I kind of came across the entire idea,
mm.
I think again my
So
fascination
fascinating.
started.
Started.
There were a couple of points. One is that because it's something very new, there are ways of not making
Making
it a stereotype of what already exists.
exists.
There are less
Mm,
hierarchy that you can be actively part of.
mm,
And most importantly, even when I was part of this, IIT,
mm,
or when many of my friends were in other
mm.
IITs, it always felt like the main focus of IIT or the main strength of IIT or priority is not really
Mm.
science, it's the technology.
Technology. Yeah.
And that has so many repercussions
Mm,
on the students.
mm,
I mean, talking about caste
mm.
system, even within
Yeah,
hostels, people would think of
uh,
science students as
slightly
not
lower.
slightly lower level
Yeah,
than the BTech. So
yeah, yeah.
I mean, maybe those are not very important
Mm,
aspect, but it's this thought
yeah,
that
yeah.
you design something right out of college, where students would be trained to
Mm.
think, to connect, and to do research. That's what all
All, yeah.
we thought about,
Mm.
but it didn't exist when we were students. And I think I was completely floored by just this possibility.
The soul for that
Yes,
particular
yes.
aspect.
So I started talking to my potential postdoc supervisor
Mm.
in University of Vienna,
Vienna.
and I told him that there is this possibility
Mm.
that I can get this permanent job in India.
Mm.
But I also feel bad that I already declined it once, and this time I'm,
Yeah.
if I go do that. And he was very generous. He
Yeah.
said, if you are convinced,
Yeah.
you should grab it.
Grab it.
We can always collaborate. We can
Wonderful.
have
Yeah.
long-term collaboration, and which I'm still doing.
Fantastic.
So by 2010, uh, April or
Mm.
May, I knew that I'm coming back to
Back.
Calcutta. And so was my husband,
Mm.
but he decided not to pursue academics anymore. So he
Mm.
finished his PhD and he went into industry.
Industry.
So we came back to Calcutta. He had a startup company,
Mm.
and I realized that I said Kolkata is not in Kolkata, but I was
Yeah.
started traveling
Traveling.
uh, back and forth from Calcutta to Mohanpur, where
Mohanpur. Yes. Yeah. Near
ISER
Kalyani.
yes, yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So now you actually come back to Kolkata. You also are in a department where geology is there. and then you have had reasonably long kind of period there for about 9 years, I suppose, and then you moved to Pune. And is there a specific reason you moved to Pune?
It's primarily to solve the two
Two
body
body problem.
problem. I think two body problem we were still managing, but three body problem makes it very
Yeah, yeah,
difficult.
yeah. The child.
Yeah, the child always makes it difficult. I mean, difficult in the sense, I think we were still managing because eventually my husband also moved to Bombay. So
Oh,
it
okay,
was
okay.
Bombay, then Mohanpur, and my daughter was growing up. One day somebody asked her, "Where is Papa?" And she pointed out to the computer screen
Oh.
because we used to do Skype. And I
uh,
think that was some of these kind of
Hints.
wake up
Come
moments
on.
that maybe I should do something about it. But I really loved and cherished my experience in ISER
Okay.
Kolkata. When I joined, the department only had uh, two permanent
Hmm.
members and eight of us joined together.
Wow.
So it
Okay.
was almost like going from almost
Distinct
non-existent uh, faculty pool to an explosion.
explosion. Yes, yeah.
And I mean, everybody who joined in that time, they were around the same age group. I
Asian.
was probably the youngest,
Hmm.
but around the same age group. So at least at that point of time, everybody was excited to do something new, to build a group of students, to train them, and we did that.
That okay.
Many of the students whom we taught,
Mm. Mm.
undergrad students, at least I had the good fortune of having them as colleagues
Wow. Okay.
eventually.
Eventually, that's
So
wonderful.
that was, I still really love that experience. It also taught me how to do science,
Mm.
especially experimental science in
Mm.
India.
Mm.
I didn't have any
Mm.
experience of that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a very important experience to have for both in terms of survival and in terms of understanding the system
Yes.
and
The last point was, it was a very humbling
mm.
experience to be part of a new institute
Mm.
in its early days, because finally once it's established, you find your contribution,
Mm.
however little it is, in something really great,
Great. Yeah.
something very permanent, and not only that, something which keeps on helping
Helping.
people over the years. I think if you think of immortality, that's the
Yeah.
closest we can get.
Absolutely. See, that's the importance of institutions, right? Because people do contribute, but within the span of the institution, the contribution is somehow somewhere there. It would still be registered, even if it becomes a footnote. It's still registered. That's an important thing. Fantastic. So now we'll make the transition to kind of 2.5 phase where we'll just get a flavor of the kind of work what you and your research group is doing. Just give us a kind of a brief account of what is the kind of questions you are interested in, what is your group working on, and what are you really building up in the lab and other.
At this point, the broad goal of research we are pursuing, we can divide it into two sort of
Mm.
directions. One direction is how the umbrella question is how the physical environment around the marine system
Mm.
changes the evolutionary trajectory. Now, this can be divided up into smaller bits and ask the question. So, one part of research that we are doing at this point is under the theme of what is called paleobiogeography. So, where you see the Arabian Sea today, if you go back 25 million years ago, the Arabian Sea was connected to the Mediterranean. So, there was a single seaway which connected all the way to the Mediterranean. And something happened around 20 million years ago where this African continent moved. As a result, the Mediterranean Sea got disconnected from the Arabian Sea. Now, this is a natural experiment, and what it means, it affected the entire sea community. And what we try to do is to quantify and understand what it does to the sea community.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, the signatures that we look for is first what it does to the physical environment, and that's why mollusk shells are so beautiful. Mollusk shells are made up of calcium carbonate. These calcium carbonates they secrete from seawater. So the calcium that's taken into the shell is actually the calcium from the seawater at that point of time. So using certain techniques, if you can trace the isotopes
Mm.
or even some of the trace elements, it gives you something, some meaningful information about the seawater chemistry of that particular time. Seawater chemistry responds to changes in the entire
Entire
globe
globe. Okay.
and some of the regional changes. For example, you have a mountain, it will weather a lot of things, it will change, it will have an influence on a bit of salinity, and some of the climate cycle is going to control the temperature. All of these are recorded
Mm.
in the mollusk shells. So now you have a system where you have the archive of the physical changes,
Mhm.
you are also looking at the response themselves. So that's the model system we look at, that you have this major change, how would it impact the entire community in
Community.
terms of changes in their physiology?
Uh,
Looking at the shell in terms of the overall community structure, which species disappeared, which are the species which continued, how big did they get, how small
mm.
did they get. All of these are indications of response.
Mm.
Why is it important to study? Because majority of the data that we use for future prediction of global change, how it's going to impact the ocean, they are coming from the temporal region.
Region.
Okay,
Okay.
so it's primarily in the Western Europe. So these are colder water.
Mm.
The tropical region, the fauna behaves often in a different way.
Mm.
Another similar thing, that in a restricted ocean like
Mm.
Mediterranean, the responses are quite different than an open ocean like an Arabian
Any.
Sea.
Okay.
So all these nuances you can test by looking at the fossil record of that period close to the Arabian Sea. So our target is a place in Kutch where we get the record. We can date them to precisely point out what is the time we are looking at. And eventually, the plan is, if once we know the patterns, we can even talk about long term responses, because often some of these responses that you see in ecological scale, in human time scale, it's not scalable.
Scalable. Yeah. Yeah.
So the fossils are the best way of looking at what happens in long time scale as well as spatial
Spatial
scale,
scale.
and that gives you the insight of probably how it may behave in future. So that's one aspect of it. The other one is more direct, and that's under the broad theme of conservation paleobiology. It is
Mm.
the idea that you learn things from paleobiological records, and then you use some of these understanding to guide conservation decisions. And it's not very commonly used in India.
Mm.
So we started a project around Maharashtra, where there are places like Bombay which were developed on a reclaimed land.
Mm. Mm.
So we know when the anthropogenic impact really started. And what we are trying to understand is, before and after this anthropogenic impact, what was the natural variability in a community and what it is now? Because that can tell us, that can actually help us to delineate what are the natural variability and what impacts the anthropogenic changes make. As natural scientists, we all appreciate that there is a large variability even in natural setting. So unless you know your baseline, you can never
Yeah.
comment. So that's something that we are trying to do here.
Wow, fascinating. So the kind of influence of human beings on the natural environment is actually the most important question now. To understand what is the influence, you will have to have the baseline. If I understand correctly, that is one of the issues what you're also trying to grasp. Now, in an kind of situation, unlike a laboratory situation, you always have human beings now in the current situation, which means that it would be very difficult for you to really take away all the influences and study them in isolation. How do you do that? Like,
So for us, the reference is pre-human time,
okay,
and the way we collect that record is through by coring.
fossils. Okay.
So let's say any place in
Mm,
Maharashtra, maybe
mm,
let's say around Bombay,
mm,
we can make a core
mm.
in the sea sediments and date them. Some of these dates would indicate times and environments which are pre-human. Pre-human settlement means, I'm not saying that there are no human beings
Mm.
in the earth, it's just in this
In the
region.
region, in that region, exactly.
And then we can compare how it's changing afterwards because we have precise timelines. So
Wonderful.
that's the, at least for next 5 6 years, that's the plan to continue.
Fascinating. So you take the sample which has been kind of drilled into the sea, I
Mhm.
assume, and then you take that particular kind of chemical elements, or what is the core
So
stuff
the
you take?
core stuff has a lot of these shells,
Shells.
so which we can date precisely, and at a population level we can also study that which are the more common ones and how they compare with
Compared with
the
it.
ones that we find. Early results are already indicating that, uh, unlike some of the older community, today's community has dominance of certain species.
Hmm.
So they are losing their overall diversity. Only a few
Few
species are
species.
dominating. So again, this is not the final result,
Hmm.
and things can change with more data. But these are some clues that already these are changes, and these changes has happened over the last 200
2
years.
years. Yeah.
Um, so now it becomes even more crucial that now if we want to add to this what is the effect of climate change,
Hmm. Hmm.
then this becomes a crucial piece to even see the
See.
next step.
Very fascinating. In fact, this brings me also to a very interesting paper I just was kind of looking at during the preparation, is where you and your colleagues asked the question how uh, global economics and colonial history influences the understanding of this biodiversity. Uh, can you just give us a gist of what is the question you're trying to address? How, for example, colonial history really impacts?
Yes.
And that is a very fascinating problem. I thought it is a more general question of interest, and brings in also scientific viewpoint on this problem. Yeah.
Yes. So this project stemmed during the pandemic when we were all locked
Mm,
down. The first author of this paper, the two authors, Emma and Nusaiba,
mm,
they contacted me over email that they are interested in this question. Now, why is this question important? From 1970s, there was almost like a revolution in paleobiology where it became very data intensive.
mm, mm.
People started to use quantitative methods, uh, and it became extremely data intensive approach. Along came this motivation that we should also have a single data repository where every all the fossil records are being kept so that everybody can access it, and some of the large questions, global questions, can be answered. And this repository is called Paleobiology Database, PBDB. And if you look at high impact journals and publishing paleobiology
Mm,
research over the last decades or so, majority of the papers are being published using paleobiology database,
mm.
and asking all these long term questions,
Question.
which are very important
Mm,
questions. Problem is that very rarely do we ask what is the reliability of
Mm.
paleobiology database itself. So this question intrigued many of us individually, but it was always between
Mm.
the seminars
Seminars, yeah,
and
yeah.
in the corridor of the conferences. It never took the center
Yes.
stage. It's for many of the scientific community, it almost like complaining
Mm.
that okay, there is a colonial issue or
Mm.
a racial
Mm.
issue and things like that. But as paleontologists, we are also trained very well to question the data because that comes naturally. Whatever fossils you are finding, you don't blindly say that this is the only biological evidence, because you know for sure that it has gone through the
Filter.
filters of the processes of preservation. So we are actually trained that way, and we use that training to question
Question.
what is the reliability of paleobiology. Does it itself has some bias, and the data, is it all spread all
Mm.
across? Because then only you can hope to answer
Yeah,
some
it's
of the
just,
global patterns and questions. So what we did, we looked at paleobiology database and looked at the data spread and which papers are getting into it. So the way paleobiology database works, it goes through a regular search through published papers, extracts the
mm,
information in terms of fossil occurrence, and then there is a group which verifies it and keeps it in the
deposits.
repository. So eventually, you can download all these data for a specific time and space and ask all these questions. In our analysis, what we found is the data distribution is extremely biased.
Mm. Mm.
It's not a natural bias, in the sense it's not like, let's say, this particular region has less amount of rocks because of which the number of fossils is less. That's a
Mm.
natural
Yes,
thing.
yeah.
Okay, and those are we would say natural filter.
Yeah.
But the human bias comes in is the places which had colonial history, and hence
Mm.
often
Mm.
hence the lower GDP.
Mm.
Their record of publication is often lower, and because PBDB is extracting information from published papers,
Mm.
the
This
representation
is
of those
those
fossils
process
are often less.
less.
What it means, for historical reasons, we know that majority of the colonies
Mm.
were in the tropics.
Yes, you're right.
And a corollary to that is tropics are not well represented, especially when we come to the modern times,
Yes, yes.
and which can lead to all kinds of futuristic prediction
Mm.
of, let's say, what happens to climate
Mm.
change. If we want to learn, okay, these were the climate changes that took place in paleontological record and
Mm.
this is how groups responded, we are using some data from temperate region
Mm.
to predict things
Things
from tropics,
topics,
which
yeah.
should not make sense. So this was the major study that
Study.
we did, and I think globally the paleontological community has been extremely receptive to
Do,
this
yeah, yeah.
particular paper, which got published in Nature, Ecology, and
Ecology. Yeah.
Evolution.
I'll be linking that in the
Yes,
show notes. It's
and
a reference.
we suddenly these discussion
Mm.
became mainstream.
Mainstream, exactly.
So we
No,
are,
see, the pandemic actually focused these questions very nicely too, because you could see the vaccine distribution. There was also an issue, in spite of the fact that there were pockets which were big product producers of vaccines. Pune city actually is one of the biggest producers, but the way it actually got distributed was an issue because there were so many geopolitical issues which
yes.
come into picture. Science is not disconnected from those influences, and this is actually a very very nice kind of reinforcement of that particular point. So now we've got a flavor of your research and other aspects. We'll now lighten the whole discussion a little bit. Now I'll ask you to just kind of uh, talk to us in your mother tongue related to your motivations and your interest. and give us a kind of a flavor of what you do, and what you are interested in,
Okay.
so that we'll be able to.
Thank you, Pawan, for asking me to speak in my mother tongue. Uh, আমি বিজ্ঞানের বিষয়ে ভাবতে ভালোবাসি, তার কারণ আমার সারা জীবন আহ, আমাকে এই শিক্ষাটা সাহায্য করে নিজেকে বুঝতে। আজকের সমাজে বিজ্ঞান মনস্ক নাগরিক থাকা অত্যন্ত জরুরি। বিজ্ঞান শিক্ষা শুধু পরীক্ষা নিরীক্ষা করতে শেখায় না, বিজ্ঞান শিক্ষা সবাইকে যুক্তিপূর্ণভাবে যে কোনো ঘটনাকে বিশ্লেষণ করতে শেখায়। সেই শিক্ষা যেমন আমাদের নিজেদের জীবনকে ভালোভাবে বুঝতে সাহায্য করে, তেমনি সমাজে এবং বিশ্বে ঘটে চলা ঘটনা প্রবাহকেও ভালোভাবে বিশ্লেষণ করার ক্ষমতা দেয়। আহ, আমি মনে করি যুক্তিপূর্ণ বিশ্লেষণ এবং সহমর্মিতা, এই দুয়ের মিশেল যে কোনো লোককে একটা ছোট গণ্ডির বাইরে গিয়ে ভাবতে সাহায্য করে। এরকম উদারমনস্ক নাগরিকরাই প্রত্যেকটি দেশে এবং সমাজে পরিবর্তন আনতে পারে, অন্তত সেটাই আমার আশা।
Wow. Wonderful. So give us just a brief gist of what you told in English, so that.
So what I said is, as a scientist, I feel very privileged because of the education in science. It helps me to introspect. In today's world, I feel it's very important not to have scientists only, also to have citizens who have a scientific thinking.
Okay.
In fact, I would say that we need even
Even
more,
more.
because scientific thinking is not restricted to only laboratory experiments. It helps us how to rationally look at uh, an event, anything, and then to derive conclusion from that. So this helps us to understand our own life, our own experience, but also to look at the society and the world and to explain what things are going on. So a combination, rational thinking and empathy. I think this combination is very important for a person, and it enables a person to go out of their comfort zone across nationality,
Okay,
caste,
nice.
creed, orientation, gender, and to kind of understand what's going on and to contribute in it, thinking rationally and with empathy. Uh, I hope that's
That
what's
was the
going to
right
be
thing.
the future's
Wonderful,
citizens.
wonderful, wonderful. It's also kind of beautifully kind of put, because in within this podcast, whenever I've been speaking on rationality, this is something I've been emphasizing, because rationality devoid of compassion and empathy actually is not the way to go about, because it would really hollow out the whole point of what being rational, right? Because that would really take out the human element, and that's exactly what we are doing to take a step against that particular process is what Pratidhani is also about. It's such an important message. I assume younger audience would actually take a lot of interesting lessons from that particular viewpoint. So the penultimate question, Devapriya, your kind of other interests. What do you have? Do you have any other interests? Also recommend to us any form of art, music, books, etc.
I'm interested in a lot of things, probably really a lot of things.
Yeah.
Um, so I read books, especially things which are not related to my research.
Yes. Yes.
I love reading short stories.
Mhm.
I love reading classical Russian literature,
Oh.
translated versions. I don't know Russian. I also am a big admirer of Harari's
Harari.
book.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. That's
Yes,
the
because it all brings all these essence of
essence.
what is the meaning of life,
Yes.
and I think it blends very well with the scientific thinking and empathy.
Empathy.
So somehow it resonates.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, Siddhartha
Mukherjee.
Mukherjee.
Oh,
So
yes.
these are books that I find very relatable. But also there is this whole classical literature.
Literature.
I'm really privileged that my mother tongue is Bengali, where there is a long tradition of
Yes. Yeah.
classical literature, and I can read it directly without translation. I started learning Spanish with the hope
Oh,
that I'll someday can read the originals of uh,
poco
so
español.
yeah,
Oh,
un poco,
poco.
the South American literature, Latin American
Nice,
literature,
nice.
but I think that's a
Far.
far away goal.
A
Uh,
good target to actually achieve, because
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
fascinating amount of
Yes, yes.
books
I read the translated
translated.
version, but I could almost see that it's uh,
Yeah,
how exciting it would be if I could read the
really.
original. So that's one part of it. I love paintings.
Mm.
Not that I can
Mm.
paint,
Mm.
but I just appreciate
Appreciate you.
painting, especially impressionists.
Mm. Mm.
So whenever I could go to any place, if there is a museum, uh, painting gallery, art gallery, I would ensure that I visit
This
those.
nice.
So those are, they kind of help me to calm down and focus and enjoy life. The other part which really helps me is music. I'm fascinated by Hindustani classical music. I cannot sing, but
Mm.
I think through training, my ears have developed.
Developed, yeah.
I appreciate that. So I've slowly started exploring Drupal, but
Oh,
it's
nice.
again, it's all I'm listening to
Listening.
it. So um, in the spare time, I go hiking a
Hiking.
bit.
Mm.
Uh, I also do stitching.
Oh, wow. Is it? Okay,
These are
fantastic.
things that just I love, and it's something creative. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's just
So
an
actually,
expression.
Devapriya is wearing an attire probably which is stitched by her. That's fascinating. It looks very professional, right? It looks as though it's a
It,
designer cloth
these were things that we were taught in school, but somehow it's just an expression that
expression.
you choose, and it helps. Anything creative, I think, has a really
Really, yeah,
liberating experience. So that's what it is.
absolutely.
I love spending time with my daughter. I mean, watching her grow up
Mm.
kind of sends
Says
me some of the reminiscing, or almost deja
nostalgic.
vu of when we were growing up,
Yeah,
and some of
nice
the curiosity, some of the very naive question,
questions.
and full of hope.
Okay,
I
yeah,
think that is these are some of the aspects of
aspects.
my life. uh,
Fantastic, nice, very very nice, very nice. Which also actually adds a lot of value to the life too, right? Because that is the whole point. So finally, what are the kind of projects you are looking at? Broad projects. What you are now looking at for the next few years? Do you have any specific directions, including non-science, or it can be kind of peripheral ones, or at the interface of the society or something?
I mean, in terms of my scientific goal, I would like to continue in the direction that I already took up
Mhm.
in terms of overall paleobiogeography, conservation paleobiology. I think shifting more
Mhm.
towards conservation paleobiology, because I could see almost real life direct
Mhm.
application. So that's going to be slightly out of the comfort zone, but
Mhm.
academic life otherwise becomes a bit dull unless you
Take
take
new
some new
challenges.
challenges. So I'm hopeful that I'm going to continue in that direction. The second aspect of it, it's very specific to paleontology in India. Our community is very small, and we desperately require a research museum at a national level. Otherwise, we are losing uh, repositories, we are losing fossils, places are not protected with all these development going on. Many of the fossiliferous sites, they are getting destroyed. So it's not just a national loss, it is a loss for the entire scientific community
Community.
from the entire globe. So I hope the government recognizes it and puts on funding
Mm.
for research
Research.
museums. So we have been part of this sort of an advocacy group,
Mm.
but I would like to devote more time into that so that there is something which is not, which showcases really India's heritage. The heritage goes much beyond human timescale,
Mm.
and that's the real heritage. And as Indians, we should cherish that.
Cherished.
And there
Absolutely.
should be a
Absolutely.
place which is a place for active research, appreciating fossils, and also tremendous outreach for every Indian. They should know what a fantastic land that we happen to born in. And that's something that I really hope. The last point I think all of us relate to is the general uh, requirement of scientific temper.
Mm. Mm.
Now it has only become sort of a phrase in the
Consideration.
constitution, but I really would like to see citizens who, with this training, change their lives. Their actions should be guided by that and empathy. So it should. So unfortunately, not every scientist has a
Mm.
scientific temperament. There is a compartmentalization, and often it also kind of percolates in our teaching,
Mm.
where we only learn how to solve a problem, but not really thinking that what are the logical steps.
Steps. Yeah.
So if we can somehow contribute to this, reducing this decoupling, it's I think it will help one to appreciate more about life, even with its uncertainties, and about society. And I think this is also a very important training which helps people to rise out of fear. All these fears about, okay, my
Mm.
identity, and then
Mm.
uh, many of the identities which are just accidental, to be proud of it or to be hating
Mm.
others because of that is a bit irrational.
Irrational.
So I
Yes.
think the basic lessons in rationality,
Mm.
basic lessons in rationality helps one to overcome that fear, and they become better citizens and
Medicine.
better
Yeah.
contributors in the society. So eventually the society can become much better, much more open, and less afraid.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Fantastic. I wish you all the best in all the ventures. And I'm very sure, because the kind of, enthusiasm, interest you have, I am in no doubt that these things will come into fruition in very good form and in substance. So I wish you all the best for all the ventures.
Thank you, Pavan, for giving me this platform. And I hope to hear more echoing sounds
Yeah.
and different sounds,
Fantastic.
but have a real community where all of us cherish similar ideas, and we reach the goal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Thank
Cyril.
you. Thank you.
So this is Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. This time with the one and the only Devapriya Chattopadhyay. Thank you, Dev.
Thank you.
Wow.